Today on Real Crusades History, we'll be looking at 5 of the most epic and important battles of the Reconquista, specifically from the era of the Crusades in Spain and Portugal. Number 1. The Battle of Uklez, 1108. Ever since the loss of Toledo to the Christians in 1085, a major goal of the Moorish powers of Al-Andalus in southern Spain had been to recapture that important Iberian city. In 1108, for the first time in 6 years, a major Almoravid army set out to attack the Christian territory of Toledo. This army was led by Tamim ibn Yusuf, brother of the Almoravid emir, Ali ibn Yusuf. Tamim's army included forces from Granada, Córdoba, Murcia, and Valencia, making it a numerically enormous coalition. For his first move, Tamim attacked Uklez, some 100 kilometers east of Toledo. The town itself fell on May 27th, but the castle resisted, obliging the Almoravids to dig in for a siege. Meanwhile, King Alfonso VI of León was well aware of the Almoravid invasion and had already dispatched a relief force. The Leonese were led by Count Alvar Fañez, one of the king's most trusted commanders. Also included in the army was King Alfonso's son and heir, Sancho Alfonses, for the first time taking a command role in a military expedition. The Almoravid forces broke away from their siege of the citadel at Uklez to meet the approaching Christians. On May 29th, just outside of Uklez, the two armies met. Alvar Fañez may have engaged the Moorish forces too soon, which allowed the numerically superior Almoravid forces to flank the Christian troops. In the resulting battle, the Leonese army was destroyed. Many high-ranking knights were killed, including the king's son, Sancho Alfonses. Alvar Fañez led the survivors out of the encirclement and managed to retreat to Madrid. Having won the field, the Almoravids beheaded the Christian dead, which numbered in the thousands, heaping the heads in a ghastly pile. An Almoravid cleric then climbed up on top of this mound of heads and preached to the victorious troops. The Almoravid triumph meant that Uklez at once passed into Moorish hands, as well as the entire south bank of the River Tajo, from Aranjuez east to Zorita. Toledo itself was in grave danger, but the Leonese mobilized a defense that prevented the Almoravids from pushing their advance beyond the Tajo. Despite this fantastic victory, Toledo, the ultimate prize, remained out of Almoravid grasp. The death of Prince Sancho Alfonses was personally devastating to King Alfonso VI, but also meant that his kingdom would have to confront the problem of succession. Ultimately, the lack of a male heir meant that the king's daughter, Urraca, would take the throne. Number 2. The Battle of Kutanda, 1120. In the second decade of the 12th century, Alfonso the Battler, King of Aragon and Navarre, made enormous gains against the Almoravids by conquering important portions of the Ebro River Valley, including the cities of Zaragoza and Tudela. The loss of Zaragoza was perhaps the greatest disaster for Iberian Islam since the passage of Toledo into Christian hands in 1085. Ali ibn Yusuf, the Almoravid ruler, reacted by mustering an army to check Alfonso's advance. By the spring of 1120, the Battler had already put Calatayud to siege, and had even dispatched troops to capture Daroca. Ali ibn Yusuf selected his brother, Ibrahim ibn Yusuf, governor of Sevilla, to lead the expedition against the Aragonese. Ibrahim was one of Ali's most trusted and talented generals, who had proven himself over the years in Iberian politics. Ibrahim marched his army toward Alfonso's position, joined en route by Moorish forces from Murcia, Granada, and Lerida. The full Almoravid army that then moved to attack Alfonso probably numbered around 2,500 cavalry and 5,000 infantry. Alfonso had good intelligence on their approach and mustered his troops for a counterattack. In addition to Alfonso's Aragonese and Navarrese troops, he had considerable French allies with him, including the army of Count William of Poitiers. This was a rare instance in which the Christian army may have slightly outnumbered the Moorish troops. Alfonso took the Almoravids by surprise on June 17th, near the village of Kutanda, in the Hiloca River Valley. A series of punishing cavalry charges led by the Battler himself utterly devastated the Almoravids. So total was the destruction inflicted on the Moorish forces that for years afterwards, a saying endured that the unlucky were like the vanquished at Kutanda. As a result, Calatayud and Daroca fell to the Christians. Alfonso the Battler's conquests were some of the most devastating losses for Al-Andalus during the early 12th century. Never again would the Almoravids attempt to take the Frontera Superior from the Aragonese. Number 3. The Battle of Fraga, 1134. Toward the end of his reign, Alfonso the Battler had conquered enormous portions of the Moors' Ebro frontier. By 1132, Alfonso felt ready to push on to Lerida and Fraga. He assembled an impressive coalition army of Aragonese, Navarrese, and French troops. By 1133, Alfonso took control of the Moorish fortress of Mequinenza, and he besieged Fraga. The siege of Fraga was long and difficult, especially due to the capable leadership of Abd Allah ibn Iyad, the governor of Lerida, who harassed Alfonso's efforts as much as possible. The siege dragged on over a year, a testament to Alfonso's abilities as a general, since he managed to hold together disparate forces for a long period of time. Realizing the enormous danger posed by Alfonso's campaign, the Almoravid governor of Valencia, Ibn Ghania, attempted to relieve Fraga twice. The first time, in early 1134, Ibn Ghania was defeated, but later that year, Ibn Ghania came up with a new plan. On July 17, 1134, Ibn Ghania's Almoravid army attacked Alfonso's camp. When the Battler rallied his forces for a counterattack, the Moors of Fraga mounted a sally and attacked Alfonso's troops from behind. The fighting that followed was hard, but the Almoravids gained the advantage. Alfonso's army was devastated. His old ally, Centul of Bigor, was killed, along with thousands of French and Aragonese troops. Alfonso himself was wounded, but managed to escape with a group of knights, despite being doggedly pursued by the victorious Almoravids. This victory was important psychologically for the Almoravids. After being defeated repeatedly by Alfonso the Battler for years, the Almoravids finally managed to take revenge on the conqueror of Zaragoza. The Almoravids did manage to make some temporary gains as a result of the victory, but the overall reality of Alfonso's Ebro conquests remained. An attempt by the Moors to recapture Zaragoza in the wake of Fraga failed, and in the coming years Alfonso's heirs would not only regain what was lost at Fraga, but push the Moorish frontier back even farther. Number 4. The Battle of Puerto, 1229. One of history's most successful crusaders was James I of Aragon, known to history as the Conqueror. Early in his reign, he announced a crusade against the Almohad-held island of Majorca. In his own autobiography, James explains his intentions in conducting this crusade. And we set out on this voyage in the faith of God, and for those who do not believe in him, going against them for 2 reasons: to convert them or destroy them, and to return that kingdom to the faith of our Lord. As we go in the name of God, we are confident that he will guide us. James sailed with his forces for Majorca on September 5th, 1229. When the king arrived at Majorca and occupied the ports, a Saracen advance force began laying camp before them. One of James' knights, Ramon de Moncada, took a reconnaissance force to assess the strength of the Saracens. On his return, Ramon said, "Let us attack them, for they are nothing." Ramon and a picked force then rode out to attack the Saracens, who promptly fled, but not without suffering heavy casualties at the hands of Ramon's men. Meanwhile, King James camped for the night, during which time he received news from his scouts that the Emir of Majorca had assembled his army near the hills of the harbor Puerto. James sent word to his nobles to prepare for battle, then heard mass in his tent at dawn. On the morning of September 12th, James's army marched on the hill country to attack the Majorcan forces. Initially, the Christian advance was somewhat chaotic. James was a young king and still a largely inexperienced tactician. Early on, the rearguard became separated from the vanguard, and James was surprised when he realized that the vanguard had already engaged with the Moors. The Count of Ampurias and his men, the Knights Templar, and the brothers Guillem and Ramon de Moncada were the first to exchange blows with the Majorcan forces, and James had to scramble to move the rearguard in a position to support them. Ultimately, the Christian knights outfought the Moors. James, along with his household knights and his chief nobles, led a final push that sent the remaining Moorish divisions into flight. James occupied Puerto and dominated the hill country, giving him a perfect position from which to attack the city of Majorca itself. The Crusaders had won the Battle of Puerto, and ultimately, James would conquer the whole of the island kingdom. Number 5. The Battle of El Puig, 1237. After his successful crusade to take Majorca, James the Conqueror's next great project was a campaign to capture the Moorish power directly south of the Kingdom of Aragon, the Taifa of Valencia. The Valencian Crusade was announced at a general court celebrated in 1236 in Monzon. The campaign began with the capture of the Moorish fortress of El Puig, situated within striking distance of Valencia. Here, in 1237, James installed a garrison under the command of Don Bernat Guillaume d'Anteca. Then the king departed for Tortosa to secure more supplies for his troops at El Puig. With the king gone, the Moorish ruler of Valencia, Zayan ibn Mardanish, decided to attack El Puig. Zayan knew that so long as the Christians held El Puig, Valencia was in serious danger. Zayan hoped to destroy the garrison at El Puig before James could return with more forces. Zayan assembled a large army of troops drawn from Játiva to Onda, a considerable area of his taifa, and then moved at dawn on El Puig. Meanwhile, 10 Aragonese horsemen, engaged in a raid on the Valencian countryside, discovered this movement of Zayan's army and rushed back to El Puig to inform Don Bernat Guillaume. Don Bernat ordered the garrison knights to hear mass, arm themselves for battle, and then assemble before the castle. Don Bernat believed that his men stood a better chance facing Zayan's troops in the field, rather than waiting to be trapped in the castle by a siege. Zayan's troops arrived and organized a strong formation with a well-armed infantry screen in the front. Zayan was the first to attack, and initially his men managed to drive back Don Bernat's knights. However, the Christians rallied, invoking the Mother of God by shouting, "Santa Maria, Santa Maria." After a powerful Aragonese charge, the Moorish lines began to falter. At this point, Zayan's formations became crowded, and some of the troops in the rear guard began to flee. Now Don Bernat's knights made a fierce attack on the Moorish vanguard, and this broke Zayan's front lines. Soon the Moors were in total rout, and the Christians pursued them all the way to the River Sec. Zayan's army endured heavy casualties. Meanwhile, the Aragonese lost only a handful of men. One of the few knights who died was Ruy Jimenez de Luesia, who drove deep into the enemy ranks during the first attacks and wasn't seen again until his comrades found his body after their victory. James was at Huesca when Guillaume de Salas, one of the knights who'd fought at the battle, arrived to deliver the news, his face still bandaged from a wound he'd received in the fighting. James rewarded Guillaume and proceeded immediately to the cathedral to offer prayers of thanks. James had the clergy sing the Te Deum Laudamus to praise God for the victory. The Christian victory at El Puig meant that James was very likely to capture Valencia. Zayan had gambled on being able to dislodge the Aragonese from their strategic occupation of El Puig, but instead ended up losing a large number of his fighting men. In the end, James would achieve total victory, conquering the entirety of the Kingdom of Valencia. The courage and skill of his knights at the Battle of El Puig did much to make that possible. This concludes our discussion of 5 epic battles of the Reconquista. You may have noticed that several important Reconquista battles did not appear in this video, and that's just because I've made full-length videos on them before. In the info box below this video, you'll find links to videos about the Battle of Urique, the Battle of El Arcos, and the Battle of Las Navas de Tolosa.